Peace. I do not own the copyrights to the music, but my words I do own the copy. But before I get into the proceedings this evening, don't mind my hair, man. You gotta do what you gotta do. Gotta grind out. You feel me? But just trying to get a couple of things situated. Yeah, I don't know what happened, but we're gonna get into the reading. Right now, I gotta do a little bit of reading. All right, chapter 2, part 8. It plays rules of the game that are designed to allow for the roundup in an unprecedented for minor non-violent. Wait, did I read that? I read that. Okay, so it's waging war. Pardon me. Chapter The New Jim Crow by Michelle Allen, part 8. Waging war. Decade of war on drugs went from being a political slow war. Now that police departments were suddenly flush and military equipment earmarked for the drug war, they needed to make use of the new reach. As the Institute report, paramilitary units, most commonly called special weapons and tactics or SWAT teams, were quickly formed in virtually every major city to fight the drug war. SWAT teams originated and gradually became more common in the 1970s, but until the drug war, they were used in primary emergency situations such as hostage taking, hijacking, escapes. That agencies suddenly have access to cash and military equipment specifically for the purpose of conducting drug raids. Today, the use of SWAT teams is to serve narcotics warrants, usually with entry into the home. In fact, in some jurisdictions, drug warrants, but in practice, the teams are used mainly. Still going? Okay. To serve search warrants on suspected drug dealers. Cocaine or marijuana. The rate of increase in the use of SWAT teams has been astonishing. In 1972, there were just a few hundred paramilitary drug raids per year in the United States. By the early 1980s, there were 3,000 SWAT deployments. By 1996, there were 33,000, and by 2001, there were 40,000. The escalation of military force was quite dramatic in cities through the United States. In the city of Minneapolis, Minnesota, for example, its SWAT team was deployed on no-knock warrants 35 times in 1986. But in 1996, that same team was deployed for drug raids more than 700 times. That's at least 2 a day. Drug raids conducted by SWAT teams are not polite encounters. In countless situations in which police could easily have arrested someone or conducted a search without a military-style raid, police blast into people's home, typically in the middle of the night, throwing grenades, shouting, and pointing guns and rifles at anyone inside, often including young children. In recent years, dozens of people have been killed by the police in the course of these raids, including elderly grandparents and those who are completely innocent of any crime, like the babies and children, even innocent men and women. Criminologist Peter Kraska reports that between 1989 and 2001, at least 780 cases of flawed paramilitary raids reached the appellate level, a dramatic increase over the 1980s when such cases were rare, or earlier when they were non-existent. Many of these cases involve people killed in botched raids. Alberta Spruill, a 57-year-old city worker from Harlem, is among the fallen. On May 16, 2003, a dozen New York City police officers stormed her apartment building on a no-knock warrant, acting on a tip from a confidential informant who told them a convicted felon was selling drugs on the 6th floor. The informant had actually been in jail at the time. He said he bought drugs in the apartment, and the target of the raid had been arrested 4 days before. But the officers didn't check and didn't even interview the building superintendent. The only resident in the building was Alberta, described by friends as a devout churchgoer. Before entering, police deployed a flashbang grenade, resulting in a blinding, deafening explosion. Alberta went into cardiac arrest and died 2 hours later. The death was ruled a homicide, but no one was indicted. With that being said, I must say, rest in power to Alberta Spruill, the 57-year-old who died on May 16, 2003, because she went into the cardiac arrest because of that paramilitary raid that came to her house. So today I'm gonna honor her for Black History because her story is gonna be a prime example of why when we join forces, we cannot be beat, we will not lose, and why we will get everything that we deserve. Unity is a must. Unification is a must. I don't care your sexual preference. I don't care your religious or spiritual preference. Unification amongst all of us that are Pan-African, that are Black, that are brown, that are the descendants of the original people. Unification is a must. Those who survive SWAT raids are generally traumatized by the event. Not long after Spruill's death, Manhattan Borough President C. Virginia Fields practices in New York City. According to the Village Voice, dozens of Black and Latino victims, nurses, secretaries, and former officers packed their chambers, airing tales, one more horrifying than the next. Most were unable to hold back tears as they described police ransacking their homes, handcuffing children and grandparents, putting guns to their heads, and being verbally and often physically abusive. In many cases, victims have received no follow-up from the NYPD, even to fix busted doors or other physical damage. I wonder, why is it okay for them to come into your house with this warrant, right? Tear your shit up, and you're not compensated when they find nothing? And like, you might actually really like have to clean a lot of your stuff and throw a whole bunch of your stuff out because they break stuff thinking people trying to hide stuff in this and in that. I feel like, man, there should be a law in place. Like, man, whenever you do a raid, I don't care how big, how small the house is. I don't care if it's a cardboard box. If you destroy something or tear something up, or if you leave it in the shape that it wasn't in prior to you coming in there, man, you should automatically have to give whatever family members that were there, each and every one of them, a minimum of $50,000, $60,000, $70,000, man. Minimum. Because that is damaging. You know how many people have had to throw away appliances that they just bought or didn't get the full usage out of, or heirlooms, you know what I mean, that might have been left from a grandmother, an aunt, a parent, a sibling, a cousin, a friend. They ain't taking none of that into consideration, man. And at the end of the day, man, it's up to us, man, to protect ourselves, man. Ain't nobody coming to save us, man. All we need, everything we need is right here. So even in small towns such as those in Dodge County, Wisconsin, SWAT teams treat routine searches for narcotics as major battlefront in the drug war. In Dodge County, police raided a mobile home in April 1995 after finding traces of marijuana in his garbage. Moments after busting into the mobile home, police shot Bryant, who was unarmed, killing him. Bryant's 8-year-old son was asleep in the next room and watched his father die while waiting for an ambulance. The district attorney theorized that the shooter's hand had a clenched and sympathetic physical reaction as his other hand reached for handcuffs. A spokesman for the Beretta company called this unlikely because the gun's double-action trigger was designed to prevent unintentional firing. The Dodge County Sheriff compared the shooting to a hunting accident. SWAT raids have not been limited to homes, apartment buildings, or public housing projects. Public high schools have been invaded by SWAT teams in search of drugs, and they do so more every year. In November 2003, for example, police raided Stratford High School in Goose Creek, South Carolina. The raid was recorded by the school surveillance cameras as well as a police camera. The tape shows students as young as 14 forced to the ground in handcuffs as officers in SWAT team uniforms and bulletproof vests aim guns at their heads and lead a drug-sniffing dog to tear through their book bags. The raid was initiated by the school's principal, who was suspicious that a single student might be dealing marijuana. No drugs or weapons were found during the raid, and no charges were filed. Nearly all of the students searched and seized were students of color, or Black students, because I'm not into that students of color. Students and people of color didn't go through what Black people went through. And I'm talking about the slaves. Yes, I am. They did not. I'm not saying that in other places like in the Caribbean and things of that. Yes, we know that those Black people definitely went through just what we went through and then some as well, right? But I'm talking about the people that didn't make no efforts in paving these streets, picking that cotton field. None of that. All of these, what was that called? It wasn't the Renaissance, but basically everything that this country was established on and how they made their wealth. We were never compensated. The people that bore us, the people that were our ancestors, were never compensated for their time, and they were forced against their will to do this. This is why they were stripped of their language and only told they could read specific books that would disarm them, that would make them, they traded their religion for our riches and our intellectual property, as well as our physical ability and our labor. Let me get back into this, right? The raid was recorded by, okay, I said that. The transformation from community policing to military policing began in 1981 when President Reagan persuaded Congress to pass the Military Cooperation with Law Enforcement Act, which encouraged the military to give local, state, and federal police access to military bases, intelligence, research, weaponry, and other equipment for drug interdiction. The legislation carved a huge exception to the Posse Comitatus Act, the Civil War era law prohibiting the use of military for civilian policing. It was followed by Reagan's National Security Decision Directive, which declared drugs a threat to U.S. national security and provided for yet more cooperation between local, state, and federal law enforcement. So let me get this right. Y'all been pushing this war on drugs agenda, the drug that y'all brung here during the Nicaragua exchange and all of that in the early 70s, right? So y'all still ain't won. Y'all been fighting the war for 40 years. Let that shit go. Y'all spending all the taxpayer dollars on doing all kind of shit that's just harming the people that in some echelons are at the bottom of the list, but in all reality make the entire infrastructure of the United States economy go round. Stop playing with them and appreciate them, man. People that have the best businesses remain around long because they show that they appreciate their customers with the quality and discounts and respect. Yeah, and hospitality, all of that count. You run in a country, it's a business, you do the same thing. You don't believe me? The United States is a country that, is a business that implies that it's just a country, but it is a business before it was anything. Let's get back into this, man. Reading is everything. I read today, and I remember hearing this a long time ago. I remember a very important Black woman said this, and I don't know if it was like Maya Angelou, Toni Morrison. It was definitely someone of that stature. But they said, if you want to be wealthier, if you want to be better, you want to read more. You know, they used to say, you want to hide something from a book, put it in a book. Well, I'm building a damn library. It's giving you some conversation to talk about, and it take you away for a moment. I'm not saying it's not interesting, and I'll knock you if you rock it. Because if I get a chance, I'm gonna watch it. I'm gonna catch up. You know what I mean? Maybe in the summertime or something. After I finish making for that night, it's not gonna happen instantly overnight, but it will happen over time. Yeah, remember I was just reading the compound effect, and that ties in the age thing, right? We only got a few more, right? In the years that followed, President enthusiastically embraced the drug war and increased the transfer of military equipment, training, contingent, of course, on the willingness of agencies to prioritize drug law enforcement and concrete resources on arrests for illegal drugs. The incentives program worked. Drug arrests skyrocketed as SWAT teams swept through urban housing projects, highways, organized drug interdiction units on the freeways, and stop and frisk were set loose on the streets. Generally, the financial incentives offered have not been well published. Average person to conclude reasonably, but mistakenly, that when their local police departments report that drug arrests have doubled or time, the arrest and illegal drug activity rather than an infusion of money and an intensified. One exception is the 2001 report by the Capital Times and that as of 2001, 65 of the state's 83 local SWAT teams had come into being since 1980, and that the explosion of SWAT teams was traceable to the Pentagon program, as well as to provide money to local police departments for drug control. Explained that in the 1990s, some police departments were given nearly of military equipment. And although the paramilitary units were often justified to city councils and essential to fight terrorism or deal with hostage situations, they were rarely deployed for those reasons, to serve routine search warrants for drugs and make drug arrests. In fact, the Times reported that police departments had an extraordinary incentive to use their new equipment for drug enforcement. The extra federal funding, the local police departments received was tied to anti-drug policing. The size of the disbursements was linked to the number of city or county drug arrests. Each arrest, in theory, would net a given city or county about $153 in state and federal funding. Non-drug related policing brought no federal dollars, even for violent crime. As a result, when Jackson County, Wisconsin quadrupled its drug arrests between 1999 and 2000, the county's federal subsidy quadrupled too. Okay, I'm going to read one more part and I'm really going to stop because it's so much to read and I'm going to just take my time with it. You ain't going nowhere. We're going to get a day, 2-3 days, 2-3 weeks older. We're going to rock out, man, till the book is over, and then we're going to jump right into Powernomics. It ain't no sense to complain and explain and break down what's been going on because you haven't been paying attention. But I'm glad that the lovely lady Michelle Alexander put this together. But we're going to break it down. Then we're going to go to our Honorable Dr. Claude Anderson, and we're going to go right back through Powernomics because that's the solution, just like Marcus Garvey said. Finders Keepers, Part 9. Excuse me. Yeah, Chapter 2, Part 9. Finders Keepers. As if the free military equipment, training, and cash grants were not enough, the Reagan administration provided law enforcement with yet another financial incentive to devote extraordinary resources to drug law enforcement rather than more serious crimes. State and local law enforcement agencies were granted the authority to keep for their own use the vast majority of cash and assets they seized when waging a drug war. This dramatic change in policy gave state and local police an enormous stake in the war on drugs, not in its success, but in its perpetual existence. Law enforcement gained a pecuniary interest not only in the fortified property, in the forfeited property, but in the profitability of the drug market itself. Hey, have you ever wondered, man, they take all of the drugs, right? The drugs keep coming back and back and back and back and back on the streets. Why, when y'all take this stuff, aren't y'all destroying it? Why are y'all just keeping it and housing it? Because y'all plan on redistributing it so that y'all can keep y'all jobs going, man. Stop it, man. Get rid of that shit, man. If there's really a war on drugs, man, seize control of everything that's coming in and out of the United States. You stop everything coming through the borders, man, there ain't gonna be no drugs here. This ain't the place where you could grow. You can't grow enough drugs in any of the fertile land in the United States to supply the drug demand in the United States. Modern drug forfeiture laws date back to 1970 when Congress passed the Comprehensive Drug Abuse Prevention and Control Act. The act included a civil forfeiture provision authorizing the government to seize and forfeit drugs, drug manufacturing and storage equipment, and conveyances used to transport drugs. As legal scholars Eric Blumenson and Eva Nilsson have explained, the provision was justified as an effort to forestall the spread of drugs in a way criminal penalties could not, by striking at its economic roots. When a drug dealer is sent to jail, there are many others ready and willing to take his place, but seizing the means of production, some legislators reason, may shut down the trafficking business for good.